Thank you all for attending. So what we're going to talk about today is an alternative to what people traditionally think of as entrepreneurship. So mostly people think of entrepreneurship as you come up with a great idea and you go out and you fundraise for it, you refine the product, take it to market, all the while, you're living in the basement of your parents' house, eating peanut butter sandwiches for 5 years, hoping to someday make it big. So that's one path of entrepreneurship that people generally talk about. What I'm going to talk about is entrepreneurship through acquisitions and what that means and the benefits of it. So it really comes down to the first thing is, do you want to be a CEO? That's it. So your traditional career path can take you a couple of different ways. If you go out and get a job, your chances of becoming a CEO, you can go into the business, find out how large it is. Your one, whatever number of employees are, a chance of becoming a CEO. And oh, by the way, they sometimes draft CEOs from other companies. But if you really want to be a CEO, this is a direct path to that. And it also has some benefits that are not associated with startups. Number one, the biggest benefit is you got instant cash flow, instant customers, and established business. So that's what makes this a little bit more appealing. The second thing, and a real reason that I stumbled into this when I was here at Carnegie Mellon, was because I don't have the next great idea. I have no idea. I have no creativity. I'm a big copycat. And generally when I see new businesses start, I think, who in the heck's going to buy that thing? I give you an example. When ESPN first started, and yes, I'm that old, I thought, who's going to watch sports 24 hours a day? Of course, there's, I don't know, 7, 8 ESPN stations. Then the cooking channel came and I thought, well, that's a dumb idea. So I'm not very good on new ideas. So this was a good path for me. And I do have to give credit to Don Jones, whose picture's back there. I always do this because Don was a mentor of mine. He's the reason I went to CMU. He started the Don Jones Center for Entrepreneurial Studies. And when I got here, I got to know Don, and Don's the one that told me all about this. So I like to come out and talk about this because Don did this for me and I want to pass it on. So why am I here? Because of that. I was here at Tepper at that time called the Graduate School of Industrial Administration, and I was taking entrepreneurial track. And for my entrepreneurial classes, which was Mini 1 and Mini 2, and by the way, at that time we had 4 entrepreneurial classes at Tepper. That was it. We had Mini 1, Mini 2, Entrepreneurship 1, Entrepreneurship 2, I think Advanced Entrepreneurship, whatever that is, and Venture Capital, which Frank Demler taught, and I think he still does teach. Anyways, so I didn't know what I wanted to do, and we had to come up with a project. So I went to Don and I said, Don, I have no skills in creativity. What do I do? He said, Len, it's really simple. There's a lot of businesses in Western Pennsylvania founded 25, 30 years ago. He said, find one with the business owners in their late 60s, maybe their 70s. They don't have a succession plan. Buy the business, grow it, and sell it. And I thought, oh my gosh, that is the greatest information I've ever gotten in my life. So my decision was to do it. And I started while I was here. It took me a little longer then because there weren't a lot of classes in ETA. Nobody really knew about this idea of entrepreneurship through acquisition. But I found an investor who's still my partner today. And we found this company that I never knew an industry existed and ended up buying it. So I was successful. And I've done that now 2 additional times as Allison mentioned, we bought, after we sold McKnight Cylinder, we bought Uncle Charlie's Sausage, sold that in 2020. And then recently, last December, bought the George J. Howe Company, which is candy nuts and coffee. So that's where I am now. But I'm really here because I believe in this. I think it is an excellent career path. I have way more fun than probably everybody I graduated with at both schools. This is so much fun, I can't tell you. And if I start to go off a little bit, you'll understand. So I'm really a zealot for this. And I believe that anybody can do this. What it takes is a lot of confidence in yourself. It takes grit because it's not easy. And finally, it takes some humility, because you have to understand you don't know it all, but there are people out there to help you, including me. Okay, So what is this? The path to entrepreneurship. As I talked about, these are some of the ideas you can deal with. New venture creation, business acquisition, which is what we're talking about here. Franchising. That's a way to go into business for yourself, but not by yourself. That's having somebody who has a proven concept that you can buy in and run your own business. Social entrepreneurship, that's really something that's growing. These are companies that have the triple bottom line. We won't go into a lot of that, but these are the options that you have. And what you have to think about is what's best for you based on your background. You know, especially here at Carnegie Mellon, there's an awful lot of smart people with a lot of smart ideas. And there have been a lot of people who have come up with ideas here. Some of them might be you right here sitting, that have gone on, started that new adventure, have that creativity that I don't have, and have been wildly successful. If we put up a list of all the companies that have spun out of Carnegie Mellon, we don't have a board big enough to do that, or you wouldn't be able to see them all if we did put them on one slide. So that is an opportunity. And if that's your background, if you've done research, if you have a great idea, if you can fix something and find customers that need that thing, notice I said need, then you could be wildly successful. What's your skill set? You know, here's the one thing you got to remember about your skill set. Whatever you don't have, you can hire, okay? So I often talk, I teach this class here at Tepper, and a lot of people, the biggest things students are nervous about, they say, well, I've never done sales. I'm afraid to do sales. That's fine. Hire a good salesperson. You know, you don't have to do this alone. And a lot of times, particularly in entrepreneurship through acquisition, there is a management team that exists. And you have to assess that management team, whether they're going to be the ones that take you to the next level or not. If you're doing a startup and you have a great idea, whatever talent you need, you can find. You can get support. And like I said, you can buy it by hiring people. And finally, think about your likes and dislikes. And I have another part of this that I'll go over a little bit more in detail about likes and dislikes. So essentially, business acquisition is a small private equity deal. Most people have heard about private equity companies. Those are people that go out and they raise a lot of money from a lot of investors, and then they start to look for companies to buy. You don't want to compete with them. And here's why. Private equity groups, they have to put their money to work. So sometimes, and I probably have somebody in the audience that might get nervous if I talk about them, private equity groups might overspend or outbid you because they got to put the money to work and they got so many deals they got to do a year, et cetera. What you want to do is you want to go right underneath that threshold that private equity companies are looking for. These are smaller companies, but companies big enough to have middle management. That's key. You don't want to buy a business to be working in the business. You want to be able to work on the business. So you want to have that level of management underneath you as CEO that can do the different parts of the actual business. That's key. So the steps are very simple in this. You go out and you raise some money. That can be through debt and it can be through equity. And then you identify some target companies that you'd like to go after, narrow your search, perform some due diligence on a company, negotiate a deal, and close. That's it. Session's over. It's that easy. No. So the thing about part of what's fun about this is what I have down here in the bottom. It doesn't put you into a hole of what you're doing. You end up using many skill sets: strategy, finance, negotiations, operations. These are all things that will be a part of this process and eventually what you'll be doing. But again, remember, you can get help. You don't have to do this alone. I generally, when I talk to students, I remind them that you're pretty smart. You're really smart if you're here listening to me. Okay, I'll just say that. But in addition to that, you probably have the skill set of what most people who own businesses right now, whether they started them or they're still running them, you're probably just as smart, if not smarter. So that's what you got to get in your head. You can do this. And if you think about it, because I teach to master students, and I encourage them not to deal with the Career Center, but to rather go out and find a company to buy. And what a lot of people say is, well, I don't know if I have the skills to do that. You probably don't, or they don't have the confidence, I should say, in themselves to do that. But you know, a lot of job offers you get, you don't know what you're going into. You know, they don't teach classes on consulting. They just teach classes on thinking, and that's all you need to do here. So it's fun from that standpoint that you get to use a lot of different skill sets. Okay, here's what's good about entrepreneurship through acquisition. It's more immediate results than new venture creation. So when you buy the business, you're buying cash flow. The day you walk into the business as the new owner, your company's probably making sales. There's accounts receivable, so people are sending you checks. You have an established workforce. So all of this is already inside the company. And so you don't have to think about, how do I find that first customer? What you're there to do is just improve the business. So you can get to work immediately on the plan to grow and improve the business. And here's what's fun about this. If you find that person who's in their late 60s, 70s, even 80s, they're tired of running their business probably. They're probably, as I call them, fat, dumb, and happy, meaning they're probably pulling a lot of money out of the business, cash flow, and they're not doing much to grow the business. Because why should they? They're getting a decent amount of money out of the business. I've talked to business owners and they tell me, I say, you know, what are your growth plans? I don't have any. I have these many customers. I get a new car every 2 years. I have a place in Florida. I make this amount of money, $400,000 or $500,000 a year. Why am I going to risk that money and invest in anything and work hard? I don't want to do that. I did it before. So there's your key. You got a business that's making money, generating cash flow, and it's kind of just floating along. And then when you find that, this is your opportunity to improve the business and grow it. And everybody always says, well, gee, if you go into an industry you don't know, remember that. I got to talk about that part too. When you go into an industry you don't know, how do you know how you're going to grow it? Here's the simple answer. Ask the owner. You'll be surprised. Here's what I used to say. And I say used to say because this is what I say. I used to say, if you were my age and buying this business, what would you do? I don't say that much anymore because the last business I bought, I was only a year younger than the person selling. And so now I say, if you were 38 years old and you were starting this and you were coming into this business, what would you do differently? And the owners will tell you. They'll say, here, you ought to go after this customer, and this customer. You ought to put in a new production line for this, or you ought to add this new service, or they'll tell you. And the obvious question is, well, why don't you do that? And they say, don't want to. I've done all that stuff. I'm not going to do all that stuff anymore. I'm going to, play golf on Wednesday afternoons. I'm going to do others that take long weekends. I mean, that's what these owners are in. They're fat, dumb, and happy, not necessarily girth-wise. Anyway, so, and the other thing I mentioned there about new industries, you're going to target, there's literally thousands of companies right now that are for sale. There are 25% of the small businesses. Now, small businesses I defined as you're looking for a company that's probably 2 to 3 million to about 10 million in revenue. Okay, free cash flow at a minimum of about $1 million, maybe up to 3 million. You want to stay in that pocket because that keeps you away from the private equity people coming down and competing with you. And it also gets you a business big enough that you got a management team as opposed to just basically buying a job. But there's all these companies. So 25% of these types of companies right now are owned by somebody 65 years or older. And there's literally millions of them. So there's thousands of targets that you can go after. And the interesting thing here is that you got to be open to what type of business you run into. I never knew that propane cylinders needed to be recertified every 12 years. Anybody know that? No, but you do. They do. And there's U.S. Department of Transportation licensed facilities that do that. That's what we bought when after I graduated from here. I had no clue that thing existed. The only thing I knew about propane was those little cylinders you put under your barbecue grill. I didn't know that people heated their homes, heated their swimming pools, ran appliances off that, but I learned that. So the reason I tell you that is there's all these opportunities that exist that you don't even know are out there. And you got to be wide-eyed and open to them, because you could stumble on something that you'll be amazed exists. And once you stumble on something, people always say, well, gee, how do you know about the propane industry? There's easy ways to find out. Every industry has a trade group. Get in touch with the trade group. I found out that from the trade group that all the future customers I had were in the NPGA, National Propane Gas Association directory. They're the ones that had cylinders. They're the ones that needed them repaired and recertified. So when I got a question from an investor who said, who's your customer? I said, they're in this book. There's 3,500 of them. I narrowed it down to, in our market area, it's probably 1,600. So you can start to learn these industries, and these industries are basic. You're looking for companies that aren't exciting. You know, as I said, those new venture companies, they're the ones that are fun. They're the ones exciting. They're the ones that make all the news about, wow, this is a new product. This stuff's all pretty much boring. I mean, right now we sell candy. It's a fun business, by the way. So, I mean, but you know, who doesn't like candy? Who doesn't drink coffee? And nuts, my gosh, I think I've added 10 pounds since I've worked there. So you just be open to what's available out there. And so basically there's something for everybody. You know, you just got to look at these companies and see if it's something that's interesting. And here's the thing about business, particularly at the CEO level. Business is business. You have to have a product or a service. You have to have a really good sales group that goes out and sells it. And that means that you got to have a product and service that people want and need. Then you got to be able to perform well. That's pretty much it. So every business, I've been in, I don't know, 6, 7 different industries. And they're easy to pick up because the basis of what the business is are those fundamental parts. Pay attention to cash flow, go out and sell, make sure you're delivering a good product, taking care of your customers, take care of your employees. Those are like basic across every business. So what's the bad about this? The search process could be long, okay? So if we use the stats out of Tepper, technically, I think I've been told I was the first one to do this right out of school. It took me 3 years, okay? Now, I didn't have the tools that all of you had that are available today. The fastest Tepper graduate, I think it's Jake Servilla out of Seattle, Washington. He graduated in May and bought a company in September. Now, he started while he was here at Tepper because he was focused on this is what he wanted to do. He did a geographical search in the Seattle, Washington area, made contacts, found a company and bought it 3 or 4 months after he graduated from here. So, but it can take long, typically 18 to 24 months, depending on, you know, how much effort you put into it. So the other thing is there are thousands of targets, but there's only a few really good deals. And here's what you want to look for. You want to look for the deal that you see that has some uniqueness that you could bring some sort of difference and grow the business, okay? So I won't go into detail, but when I went into our McKnight Cylinder, I noticed that the way they went to market was kind of backwards. They weren't fulfilling the right sales channel. And I figured if we could flip that around and get the different customers, we could grow. And we did, okay? So that's what you're looking for, because you're paying attention to something that either the owner doesn't want to do. And by the way, the owner is the one that told me to do that. Or the owners are so close to the business that they can't see it from an objective standpoint, okay? So the other thing is the good deals come and they go very quickly. So it's your job to be successful. You got to have relationships with sources of cash, and you have to be quick to evaluate and make a decision you're going to do this, okay? That's doing where you're going out and searching for companies. Okay. So why should you do this? I don't know. I should change this around to why wouldn't you do this? But I leave it at why would you do this? Number one, you truly are in the leadership role. You are truly in the leadership role. When you buy these companies, remember, the owner left it doing okay, growing a little bit, making money, and you're going to take it somewhere. It's all up to you. It's all, you can invest in the stock market, you can invest wherever you want to invest, but there's no better, I think, no better person to invest than in yourself. And you get to make the decisions, and you make decisions on a daily basis that are noticeable changes. You get to lead all of the departments of the organization. You get to set a path of where you want to go with the company, and you get to lead everybody to that. Second, it's independence. People often ask me, I was on a podcast because now everybody wants to be a podcaster, so they ask you to be on podcast. So I'm always asked to be on podcast. And somebody said to me, well, how do you deal with work-life balance? Work, your private life and your work balance. And I said, I'm totally independent. I do what I manage both. That doesn't mean I don't work. I work all the time. If you ask me how many hours a week I work, I have no clue. I have no clue. Because the business becomes you and you become the business. And that's what's fun. Doesn't mean you're always working, but it does mean you're thinking about things, and it just sort of migrates together. But at the same time, you're not locked into 8 to 5. Okay? So you do have this independence. More importantly, from an independent standpoint, I don't know how many of you have ever worked somewhere, but I'm sure you've had that discussion if you worked, even if you worked when you were growing up somewhere at a fast food joint. I'm sure you got together with the other employees and said, these people that run this place, they have no clue what the heck they're doing. If I was running it, we'd be doing this, 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 and this. Well, if you do this type of work, you get to do this, 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 and this, because it's your ideas and it's what you do. What's really, to somewhat exciting, is that there's high highs and low lows. There's high highs when you get that customer you've been working on for 6 months and you got a team together and you finally won that one. And then there's the low lows of it's Tuesday and you have $40,000 in your checking account and ADP's $62,000 for payroll on Thursday. So you got to figure that one out. There's a direct reward. Everything you do, like I said, on a daily basis, you could be going home saying, wow, we made a difference today. There's a lot of screw ups too. I mean, I told you you're all smart, you could do this, but you can make mistakes. We one time worked 6 months on changing an operations line at one of our businesses. We thought we figured out something that was going to change the business, revolutionize it, the way we did this certain product. We spent 6 months, fortunately we didn't spend a lot of money on it. We put the line in, started at 7 o'clock on a Monday morning. At noon, me and the operations guy looked at each other and said, boy, that was dumb. So we switched it all back over. Unfortunately, like I said, it didn't cost us a lot of money. So it's a different type of satisfaction than working on satisfying a boss. Learning. You learn every day. I still learn every day. Speaking of those podcasts, I was on a talk a couple of weeks ago and a person said to me something about being successful. And I said, you know what? I don't consider myself successful at all. Because the day you feel yourself successful, you're going to quit. I look at it as I'm learning every day. I'm still learning every day. And that's the best part of this thing, is you're learning all the time. You learn about industries that don't exist. You learn about ways of doing things that you maybe never thought of. You learn about how to deal with people to the nth degree, okay? And what's fun is you get to use your intuition. Twice, I did not follow my gut. Well, probably more than twice, but twice that stuck out in my mind. I did not follow my gut that told me not to hire these 2 individuals at 2 different companies that I had. And both times I blew it. And so you get to use your intuition. You get to think about stuff. And so part of this is, if you're a curious person, that goes a long way in this whole thing. And the other thing is being humble. You don't know it all. And that's what's fun about going into a business that you never heard of before, because you want to talk about humility. You have no idea. So you got to learn everything. So it's a path, to me, the way it's gratifying is, yeah, you grow a business, you make a few bucks or hopefully a lot of bucks, but at the same time, you're learning on a different level at all times. I mean, we're learning right now all the issues that are happening today. We're battling supply chain issues while we're battling employment issues, while we're battling inflation and raising prices and all of that stuff. But it's constant. This is stuff I, as a group have never gone through before, and you get to deal with that. All right, should you do it? Number one thing is, whoever your life partner is better be in. Because if they're not, I can't imagine. Fortunately, I have a wife that is just fabulous. Whatever I say I'm doing, she says, "Oh, that's great. Keep me posted." So fortunately, she never gets too excited about this. Even when I first started, when I first went and started looking for a business, we were married, had a 4-year-old child, and I was like, well, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out and look for this business and then take all the money we have and invest it with the investors and buy this. And she said, wow, that's great. You got to have that person doing that for a couple of reasons. Number one, they buy in. Number two, they become a sounding board, because when you're doing this, I have this summary down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, loss of colleagues. You end up with different colleagues. When you work somewhere, you always have that collaboration with the other group, and you always have management that you can go and talk to. But when you're the CEO, most of the people at your organization, you can't really talk about everything with, because you don't want to scare them. You don't want to tell them what you're really thinking, because you might be nervous about something, or you might have a struggle that you're dealing with. And so you end up, you got to have somebody to talk to. So having a significant other that's there for you is a big deal. And one who's bought into it, not one who says, see, I told you shouldn't have done this. So that's kind of a very, very important thing. Fortunately, my wife, this is her description. She told me this a long time ago. Her description of an entrepreneur is somebody will do anything not to get a real job. So that's pretty much me. The next thing is, when you do this, if you do a true search, there could be a loss of salary and benefits. You have to think of it on a personal level, how to do that. Maybe your significant other, a lot of searchers who are out doing this full time looking for businesses have a significant other that has a job and can support the search. So you just have to be kind of think that through about, can you make it? Now, I tell young people, if you don't have any commitments, there's never a better time to do this. Because I run into students that say, well, I think I'm going to go work for 5 to 10 years and then do this, look for a business to buy. Some people do that. Most never do, because once you get that far along, you got that big McMansion in the suburbs, you got you're at a place where you're growing inside the organization. It's a little bit tougher. You have a family, you have more responsibilities. It could be tougher. So when you're young, it's kind of fun. You can do it. This is the biggest thing I stress. There's a study that just came out on entrepreneurship through acquisition by Yale, and they asked people who had graduated recently from schools that teach ETA, and they had about 470 people respond. Why did you not do this? You took the classes. Why did you not do it? The number one answer was they didn't think they could. Not they didn't think they could find a company, raise the money, and buy it. They thought they couldn't run the company. If I could do it, you all can do it. That's all I got to say. It's hard. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of fun, but you're smart enough to do it. So don't let that stop you. And besides, there's always the opportunity to get help, whether that's buying, I always say buying, but that's hiring people to support you. That's an advisory board. Investors, people that are invested in the company, generally they're successful people that can help you. It's surrounding yourself with help. And I would charge you to do that no matter what you go into. Don't ever think you know it all, and don't ever be afraid to ask for help. I'll tell you one story that was where this really became apparent to me. I never fired anybody in my entire life. And I had to fire somebody about 1.5 years into, well, it should have been sooner, but it was about 1.5 years into the business. I think I put it off for a year because I never did this before and I didn't know how to do it. And that's absolutely the worst thing of this whole thing, is having to fire somebody, because you're responsible for their livelihood. You're responsible to their family and all of this stuff. But at the end, sometimes you got to do that. And so I didn't know what to do. And we had an advisory, we had a board of directors, and I had a person on the board of directors named Ron Hawkins, dear friend of mine, has been on 2 of my boards. And I called him up. I said, Ron, this person's got to go. I just don't know how to do it. And he talked me right through it. And it was still hard, but it wasn't as painful. And the nicest thing is once the person was gone, I felt a lot better because things we could move on. So anyways, it's being open to going out and finding people that can help you. And that's where this being humble has to be. And as I said, it's not just running a company in anything you do. Never be afraid to ask questions. Yeah, so I talked about not having those colleagues, but having different colleagues. That could be your investors, your board of directors, your advisory board, other people that are running companies. Those are the best because you're all in this together. You're all fighting the same fights. You do have a lack of departments usually. You usually have people that are crossing over. So there's generally not an HR department, marketing department, R&D department. There's not all those departments. You know, the HR department's probably the controller who's doing the financing, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. You get to use your, you start to count on your intuition, just being able to think, not making quick decisions, and just following what your gut tells you to do, as opposed to listening to somebody else tell you what you should be doing. You have to be decisive. You can't get locked in analysis paralysis. You have to be willing to gather as much information as you can. And I had a speaker the other night who, I love these 2 speakers. They're 2 brothers and they're running these companies. One's a history major and one's an econ major. So I said to the history major, I said, well, how'd you transfer from being a history major into, I did this in purpose in front of the class. Well, how'd you go from running, being a history graduate major to running a company? He said, well, you just got to pay attention and learn things and ask for help. It's pretty much all it takes. And then use common sense was his last thing. Most of the issues you fight, you can just handle with common sense. Certainly got to have a lot of energy. Now, this next line scares a lot of people. It's selling, selling, selling. Most people say, I don't want to sell. I'm not a good salesperson. I'm afraid to sell. It's not necessarily what I mean. I mean that, number one, you got to be able to have confidence in yourself to sell yourself, particularly to investors, to that person that you're buying the company from. They have to understand you. They have to believe that you're going to take this company somewhere, because to a lot of them, they've either started this company 30 years ago. They've been running it as a family business, maybe since their parents started it. So there's a lot of emotion stuck in that, and they want to make sure the next person coming in can do this. You got to be selling to customers. You got to be selling to your employees. You just got to constantly be selling. But that doesn't mean selling in a traditional word. That just means you're constantly moving with the business as part of you, and you're positive about it, and you're thinking through all the issues, and you're looking for help. The thing about this is, I have to tell you, and this is from experience, once you're in, you do this, there's no going back. Everybody that I know who does this, after they sell the company, they buy another company, or they invest in people like you to buy a company. I mean, that's what searchers do. That's what they're called, searchers, is that they buy a company, sell it. After we sold our first company after 9 years, they started looking for another company. Took me a couple years, found another one, bought that, sold that one, so found another one. So it just gets in your blood because it's way fun. That's all I could tell you. It's way fun. Okay. So funding, this is usually number 3 question. Number 2 is, how do you find these businesses? Number 3 is usually, first is, I can't do this. I don't have the skill set. Yes, you do. Number 3 is usually funding. How do you fund these businesses? Well, the good news for you is that there's a lot of money out there. I didn't know this when I was looking, and I certainly didn't. This whole concept of having people coming out of either graduate school or some career and saying, I'm going to go find a company to buy, that was like not very much talked about. Today, it's talked about a lot. So there are actually people that do, one of the things we talk about is search funds. So Stanford puts out a white paper. If you Google the Stanford business school's white paper on ETA. It comes up. They update it every 2 years, and they talk about the whole search process. That is raising a search fund. That means where you go out and talk to investors to give you money to pay your salary, pay your benefits, give you money to travel around and talk to business owners they'll give you up to a couple of years to do that. And then when you find something, they'll invest in the company. If that was going on back when I started this, oh my gosh, it would have been just so thrilling. So there is money available. So where does it come from? Everybody talks about family and friends. I always say, be careful with that one. Be careful for 2 reasons. Number one, you're dealing with family and friends' money. I've seen friends go into partnerships and end up suing each other. I've seen families busted apart because of businesses. So you might want to do that, but you better think real hard about it. I always say, make sure that, whatever you're doing when you're taking money from family and friends, you want to make sure that it can survive the holiday dinners. So that's on that side. On the other side is, you don't want a bunch of people who think they own the business, okay? So you got to be really clear who's in charge. Okay. Former business associates, people that you know, that maybe you work somewhere and you got to know a couple of the executives, those people. Business owners. Business owners are great. They believe in the whole concept of owning a small business. They've made money at this, so they're looking to partner or invest in companies that are similar to what they've done because they know it works. High net worth individuals. High net worth individuals, a lot of times, are business owners or former business owners who sold their company for a lot of money. And so now they're looking to invest again in small companies for 2 reasons. Number one, they believe in the concept because they did it. And number 2, it's a diversification thing. Put so much money in the stock market, so much in bonds, so much in real estate, so much in small companies. Because a lot of times small companies can do better than large companies because they're not focused on the next quarter, okay? Family offices, this is generally similar to high net worth individuals. These are generally families that probably have sold a business that was a family business. And then they open up an office where they're going to start to invest, maybe donate money, etc. The next thing is search fund funders. That's what I alluded to a little bit when you talk about the Stanford model of search. These are people that now are investing in people who are going to go out and search for companies. And there's a group of these, they're starting to be more and more around there. And the best way to find people is the network. Just start talking. I did a talk last night, and the first question somebody said, well, how do I find people to network with? Or how do I find people to invest? I said, well, you just got to start talking to people. You just got to start asking around. Let everybody know what you're doing. I'm looking for investors. I'm going to buy a small business. People always want to help people. If you think about it, you say, I'd like to go buy a car. And your friend will say, oh, you should go see this Mary over at this dealership. She's great. She sold me my car. Or you should buy this kind of car. People always want to give you, they want to help you. So you should let people know you're doing this. And then follow up on the networks. That's what's key. If somebody tells you to call somebody, then call them back and tell them how successful or whether it wasn't right for you as far as networking. But keep the network alive. Lastly, network. In case I didn't mention that enough. It works. So let me tell you real quick how I found my first company. This is when believe it or not, the internet it existed, but not that anybody could use it. So I used to have to go down to the business library in Pittsburgh and actually write down business names. So I found this one group I read in the Business Times that there was a guy at the Still Valley Authority that was helping owners who were ready to retire without succession plans find buyers. I thought, wow, this is perfect. So I called this person up and I said, hey, I'd like to meet with you. So come on in. So I told him what I wanted to do. He gave me 4 names. So I sent letters to all 4 people. 2 people didn't answer my phone call when I called back. 1 person answered my phone call and said, yeah, well, good luck. The 4th one said, why don't you come in and talk to me and my partner? That's my good friends, Mal and Fred. That was back in, I don't know, 1990 something. So I went to see Mel and Fred. They wanted way too much money for their business. I tried to buy their business 3 times over 15 years. Every time I sold a business, I went back and tried to buy their business. They always wanted too much money. They finally sold it. But so one time I stopped by because I continued to network with Mel and Fred. I would stop by every couple of months. I stopped by one day. Fred said, here's an unsolicited letter I got from a business broker that has a business for sale. Called that person up. That became the first business I bought. So I talked to the person at the Still Valley Authority who led me to Mel and Fred. Mel and Fred led me to the Richard Bernstein, the broker, and ended up buying the business. So this part about networking really works, okay? Same thing happened when we did Uncle Charlie's. Same guy who used to work for Still Valley Authority now works somewhere else. He was running a fund, called me up and he said, hey, do you and your partners want to take a shot at Uncle Charlie's sausage? I always say, sure, because I look at everything. I look at a lot of bad stuff, but that's what you have to do. You have to look at everything, okay? Here's what's key about investors, though. You have to make sure you can work with them, okay? There's a fine line, okay, between having help and having somebody micromanaging you. You got to understand who these people are. You got to get to know them on a personal level and see if you could really work with them. If they've invested in other companies, talk to those people. I mean, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, and that's what you have to do. But what do they bring besides cash? They're a sounding board. They're people that you could call up because they have an invested interest in this business as much as you do. So if you have a question or you have a problem, they'll give you all their attention and help you. So they become that source of help. The other thing they could do is provide introductions. Banks, they generally work with probably banks. They probably know senior lenders that can get you at a higher level to get funding. They know other investors. The one thing you always want to do is when you get an investor who's interested in you, whether you're doing a search or a company that you found, ask them who else that you should be talking to. Who's some of your buddies? Because investors they're like venture capitalists. They like to make sure that there's other people that have checked this business out and they agree with it, that it's a good deal. Okay. And they bring professionals. They bring attorneys, accountants, people that have done this before. One thing about attorneys, if you go about buying a business, make sure you find an attorney that has done buying businesses. Don't get, your sister-in-law's cousin who's a divorce attorney. Nothing against your sister-in-law's cousins who's a divorce attorney. They're going to have to learn a lot. Whereas people that do this on a regular basis, they have most of the information you need on their hard drive. Okay. Sellers, people that are selling. So these investors can help you find people that have companies for sale. They might know a buddy who's ready to exit. They certainly provide an awful lot of support. Generally, if they're a big enough investor, they want to be on your board of directors, which is a good thing to have along, because again, they have invested in the business, so they have kind of skin in the game to make sure you're successful. And as I mentioned about my friend Ron, they help early in running a company. So when you think about, gee, I don't know how to do this. I never fired anybody in my life. I never ran an organization that has 23 employees. I never dealt with this type of employee, blah, blah, blah. These people probably have. Okay, so the search, how do you find the companies? Number 2 question I get, how do you find these companies? Well, there's people out there that have companies for sale, investment bankers and business brokers. These are people that go and they talk to these people that are in their late 60s, early 70s, and who don't have a succession plan, and they say, I could sell your business for you. So if you get a list of this group, you'll find businesses that are for sale. By the way, once you talk to them, they'll send you all the time businesses for sale because they generally don't get paid until they sell the business. So they're very highly motivated. Sort of a different way to go about it is talk to people that deal with owners. These would be CPAs, financial planners, attorneys. they have clients that might be talking to them about wanting to retire. The advantage to this and direct contact with owners is that you don't get into a competitive bid process for the business. Generally, if you look at businesses that an investment bank or a business broker brings to you, they've probably sent that out to 10,000 people, literally 10,000 people. So your competition just went way up. Now you're competing for the company and you get into a bid process. Whereas if you go through professionals or you directly contact owners, generally it's just you. And that way you can get to know the owner, get to know the business. That's a little bit harder because the information's not as readily available as what brokers and investment bankers do. But nevertheless, you don't have the competition, okay? You should always start, why I'm open to any type of business. There's some I'm not. But you should start with a thesis to kind of quantify it, or I guess to narrow it a little bit. So I usually talk about picking maybe 3 industries that you think are interesting. Come up with what size you think you'd like to have. Geography becomes a big thing. You know, can you live in a certain place? Are you open to the whole country, the whole world? Or in my case, I mostly searched in a 75 to 100-mile radius of Pittsburgh. So you have to put these things in, and then you develop lists of companies, and the information's all there. Owner's name, address, phone number, email address, information on the company, and that's who you start to go with. And in addition to all that, you network, because you never know. Just like the guy at the Still Valley Authority who led me to Mountain Fred, who led me to the business broker that had a business for sale. You never know who knows someone that's ready to sell their business. And then you just network some more, okay? Just in case you didn't get that. And I really suggest to people, even if you don't do this type of work, you should always be networking. Okay. So I covered the big 3 things. Yes, you can do it. You can get the financing, and you can find these businesses because there's an awful lot out there for sale. So with that, I'll open up to any questions. Yes. Pardon me? That's a great question. Thanks for bringing that up. Everybody always thinks that you buy a business and you exit in 5 years. That's like the standard. You exit when it's the right time, okay? So how we knew it was the right time was, and by the way, my friend Don, when we bought the business, I just have to tell you a quick story. Don said to me, I called Don up and I said, Don, I actually did it. I said, you know, you told me go find a business. I found it. We just closed last Friday. He said, great, Len. Don was a great guy. He said, let's get together for breakfast. We got together for breakfast. He walked in and he said, congratulations. Who are you going to sell it to? I said, Don, I just bought it 2 weeks ago. What the heck are you talking about? He said, well, he said, it doesn't matter whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years. Someday you're going to sell this and you got to start setting the company up for that. I took a year and I figured there were 2 companies that would buy us. And I started to work that. And it got to the point where it was time to have the one buy us. So what I suggest is don't go into the business figuring you got a time that you're going to sell it. Okay, because that's very restricting. Here's the perfect example. Who would ever have thought this stupid virus would show up? So if you bought a company in 2018, which I know people that bought them in 2018 and 19, and this thing shows up and shuts the whole economy down. And I know when one of the Tepper students bought a company in Houston, Texas in I think September of 2019 with these great plans to grow over the next couple of years. Well, for 18 months, that business was basically shut down. So if you put a time frame on you, it's too confining. The second thing is don't run the company like you're going to sell it. That also is restricting you. Run the company like you're going to operate it for the rest of your life. And then it'll come up. The time will come up. You know, a lot of times people show up at your door, you know, and they say, we've been watching you. A lot of times it's a competitor who wants to buy your company and get you out of it. So that's kind of the feel. Okay. And yes.
Due diligence on potential companies
what do you usually look for in market attractiveness, or what are the factors? That's a great question. Look at everything. So in due diligence, I'm glad you brought that up. So due diligence is you find a company, you basically have made a deal, and now you say to the owner, you gave me all that information. I'm going to spend the next 60 to 90 days really asking you a lot of questions and asking for a lot of information. So to directly answer your question, I have 3 lists, and they're easily found on the internet, due diligence lists, and they're broken into categories. You want to do legal work. You want to make sure the company really does exist. You want to make sure that who owns it. I mean, when I did acquisitions for the company that acquired us, and I ran into a situation, we were ready to buy a company, and I found out that there was a brother and sister who owned 33% each. So now they were controlling, and they shut the deal down. So you go through legal stuff, certainly financial information. You want to know everything about the finances. And a lot of times these small businesses don't have very good financial records. And what I suggest you do is follow the cash. When we bought the cylinder business, my partner sent in, at that time it's called Alper & Rosenthal, CPA firm, to do quality of earnings. 2 weeks later, the partner called and said, we can't do it. There's nothing, we can't figure this thing out. Partner said, what are you going to do? I said, well, follow the cash. Got all the check statements for the past 3 years, payroll records, and just watch accounts receivable and payables, and made sure the cash was going in and out and where it was going. So yes, the operations, you want to understand the operations, the employees, you want to see who's there, get as much background. So there's all these things you want to do, okay? But in the end, you want to come up with 5 to 10 questions that will shut the deal down. They commonly refer to it as, what keeps you up at night? I got that question on a podcast too. I said, fortunately, I work hard enough. I sleep like a baby. I never stay up all night. But you want to come up with 5 to 10 questions that if these questions get answered a certain way, you're probably not going to do the deal. And you want to drill down in those and make sure you're comfortable. The other thing about due diligence is there may be issues. You go, whoa, that's an issue. That doesn't mean the deal's over. Can you solve that issue? Can you reduce the price because of that issue? That's a lot of times what you do. Okay. Do you defer the payment? So you find out that there's a big customer that has 6 months left on their contract. You might write, hey, we're gonna hold back X number of dollars because if this company doesn't re-sign that contract, the value of this business just went down. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
So when you're getting funding from like high net worth individuals or like other like bankers, so like it just becomes like an equity agreement where like so that like how do you know like the value and then like how you get to that case?
So first of all, you're gonna come up with a valuation of the business. Then you're gonna figure out approximately how much money you can borrow against the business from a traditional bank. Then you're gonna know how much you need from investors. Okay. And basically you work out the percentages, because it's not like the stock market where you pay so much per share. Okay. Because number one, investors recognize you found the business, so you should get some percentage for that. You should have an opportunity to earn more money for running the business. So that's all negotiated. There's no hard fact, this is how you do it. It's all negotiations with the investors. But the most important thing you do, write it all down. Because what I'm saying to you, you might hear different than what I think you hear or that I'm saying, and vice versa. So generally there's always an agreement that's written out, very spelled out, who owns what, who's running the place. There's an operating agreement, but that's all documented. Okay. Anything else? Yes.
So other than the search fund, which seems like a formal search criteria, every other person on that list were like your network. You go out and find out either network individual or professional, right? So,
Yes. So the idea is you network. You start talking to people, friends of friends. Business owners are the best to start with. Business owners generally know who the high net worth individuals are. They generally know bankers. They know those types of people. So it's a matter of just starting to talk with people, letting them know what you want to do and what your goals are. And you'll get help. Yes.
When you're looking at companies, and you have investment thesis, you usually have like a growth rate that you have in mind that like if, you know,
So where you could take the business?
yeah, like is there like your evaluated business like it has to be over this much growth that actually I can expect?
Well, I think when you find the business, you want to see if there's growth potential. You know, you don't want to walk into something that's tapped out. So you want to be looking at what that growth potential is. And it's hard to answer what is that because everything is different. You know, it really depends on what the business is. Everything is unique. I mean, people always say, oh, this is unique. It is true. Every deal is unique. I mean, we're looking at an add-on company, another snack company to add on to our candy business. And we just, you know, basically got to an agreement last week. We're starting due diligence. And we see this as helping our company go in a different direction. So what we're going to investigate now, because you asked the question about due diligence, is have a person that we're bringing in as a consultant to actually study that channel, make sure it's viable, and what is the growth opportunities. Okay, I think I'm about out of time. Is that about right? Okay, I don't want to hold everybody up. So thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for the questions. And by the way, I always tell everybody who I talk to, I'm yours for life. So if you decide to do this path, you have questions, certainly get in touch here and they'll find me, or I'm here on the faculty, my email address, all of that stuff. I'd be more than happy to help you or talk to you in any way. Okay, thank you.